Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to wrap up our look at the cartoon history of the universe by Larry Gonick. This is volume number 7, and it's all about Athens. So the third issue in a row focusing on Greece, and the second focusing pretty much on Athens. So I gotta say, it's a pretty fun issue, but I liked it more when he was jumping around. I know I said this last time, but this is like getting ridiculous now. It's like there's a lot of parts of the world I want to see other than, Greece. I know a lot of important stuff happened then, so it's almost worth the microscopic look at it. But still, I'm sure there was other really cool shit going on in the world. I've been bitching about the covers being very lackluster. And I gotta say, this isn't a very dynamic cover. It's just a scene of Athens. But I like it a lot more than the past few. It's just because, I don't know, it's just a well-drawn, graphically pleasing view of Athens. And I kind of like it. We have the introduction once again, where Larry Gonick, the cartoon character Larry Gonick, gets in a little goofy humor trying to put on a Greek toga, and he wraps himself up. So we start now, volume 7. Oh, before we continue, I should mention, it's really weird. There's like a 6-year gap in between the last issue and this one. This one came out in 1987, and you can see the difference, because I didn't realize that until I was done with the comic. The art in this is so much different, but not this page. This page looks like Larry Gonick, right? Pretty typical of the art we've seen. But the rest of the issue is, he adopted this new style. You'll see as we progress. But it's kind of interesting that he decided at that late a date to really mix things up artistically. So here we see a nice little map give us a little orientation here. So basically 480 BC, as we saw last issue, Persia was defeated and left Greece. Now, when they left, they destroyed Athens. Athens is just rubble. The Athenians rebuild. But Sparta basically gives them a rule. They're like, you can't rebuild your city walls. Sparta is like one of the few cities that didn't have city walls because they were surrounded by mountains, and also their citizens were like a wall. They just had the toughest, meanest soldiers in Greece, so anyone trying to attack them would find a wall of shields and spears. So if you remember the Themistocles, he was a leading citizen of Athens. He basically tricks the Spartans, and they rebuild the wall anyway. The Spartans just kind of go home fuming. They don't make a big stink about it, but there's definitely tension between Sparta and Athens after they united to fight Persia. Especially because Sparta believes in, autocracy. And, Athens has this whole democratic thing going. Eventually, though, Themistocles gets kicked out. Apparently, his ego was so big that people just got sick of him. He actually moved to Persia and kind of convinced the local satrap, impressed him, and he ended his days in luxury as the governor of Magnesia, and some part of the Persian Empire. Very tricky guy. I mean, he definitely was kind of a charlatan. We have this thing about heralds. And, that was a job back then. Basically, they were messengers. I do like this little goofy joke he puts in. He says, very few occupations have newspapers named after them. Because, herald is a popular newspaper name. So he imagines what would happen if other occupations became newspaper names. The Detroit plumber torturer. The Pittsburgh cartoonist. That was kind of funny. Next chapter, Wood and Iron. So we talk about the Delian League here. So a lot of the Ionian cities and the Aegean Islands kind of teamed up with Athens, and they made a league. They all contributed money to it or ships. Most of the regions found it easier to just give money, but Athens already had their huge navy. So pretty much this was the Athenian League. It's almost like NATO, where Athens was like the United States. Sure, the other countries pitched in, but Athens was the big military might that backed it up. I think this was interesting about their triremes, the ships they had with the 3 layers of oars. To this day, historians still don't know exactly how they did it, how they managed to sit and have these 3 oars not interlock with each other and smoothly row these giant ships. So guys, I don't know if you can notice already, look how different this art is. It's very stylized. It's almost as if he's been looking at like Arnold Roth cartoons. And some of the stuff, I even see like the Mexican cartoonist Portillas. And I see all kinds of weird little influences, but it's very different, strikingly different than his cute, this kind of art. It's still interesting to me that the introduction is drawn in that style. I assume it was drawn at this time, so I don't know. So now the 470s was a pretty good time for Greece. He tells us about an average citizen of the day, an average, like wealthy, powerful citizen, Cimon. And he led a life of leisure, hunting and drinking, partying. And we learn a little bit about women's roles in ancient Greece and in Athens. So then around 463 BC, the radical Democrats arose. And they basically, what they sound like. They wanted more political rights for poor citizens. They hated Sparta because Sparta was an enemy of democracy. At one point, the Helots, the Spartan slaves, they revolted. Sparta asked Athens for help. Cimon, the guy I just told you about, he said he was the leading voice, and he sent soldiers to help Sparta. But there were so many radical Democrats in the army, they would debate these Spartans and be like, is it right for the government to govern without consent? And so the Spartans sent them away. They were just like, I would rather fight the Helots alone. You guys are being pains in the asses. You're being annoying. So right around this time, there was a revolution. Not a bloody revolution, but a political revolution where a lot of the conservatives were put to trial for corruption. The citizen assembly, as opposed to the aristocrat assembly, granted themselves a lot more power, and Cimon was ostracized for 10 years. The radicals were now supreme. Even under the radicals, though, there were still classes, There were still rich people and poor people. And around this time, the leader of the radical Democrats was murdered. Conspiracies were abounding, and from this chaos arose Pericles. He kind of took over. Pericles was just a incorruptible, calm, shrewd, tough leader. That's why this era is called the Periclean Age. He also had a really weirdly shaped head. They called him the Olympian, not because he was godlike, but because his head looked like Mount Olympus. He had this giant bump on his head. But a lot of people made fun of him for it. He kind of had a really shitty marriage and home life. He was married to his cousin. He had these two little brats he didn't really care for. And we see the whole page here describing how Athenian democracy worked. And it was as close as you could get to like pure democracy. Even like the military, there was 10 elected generals who ran all the military matters. So it'd almost be as if like we got to vote on the commanders-in-chief in America. There still was an assembly of the rich. So the House of Lords, if you will, as opposed to the House of Commons, but they had greatly reduced powers. Judges were elected. Of course, all the even the basically the leaders. I don't know what the presidents, the prime ministers. They really had no powers. They had to persuade people to do what they wanted. So imagine if the president couldn't just declare something. He had to persuade the American people every time he wanted to start a war or do this or that. There was no lawyers. Lawsuits were tried by juries of like 500 people, 1,000 people. So you just have this huge stadium crowd voting yay or nay on someone's fate in a lawsuit. Of course, it's total democracy if you don't count the women and the slaves. I really like this weird panel here. So Pericles convinces the Greeks, the Athenians, to go to war. And they basically expanded their empire. Finally, after 15 years, though, everyone got tired of fighting. And that was all done. So now we enter the Golden Age, 445 BC. It's called that, but at the beginning of the Golden Age, Athens was kind of a podunk town. We think of Athens and, those Greek cities, we see those beautiful ruins. But at the time, it was kind of like a sleepy, dusty little town. I mean, not that little, but it didn't have like the Parthenon and all these amazing edifices. So Pericles proposed that all this imperial revenue they were making from all this conquering lands, they should beautify Athens with temples and statues and public parks and things. I like it in this issue, it's all these 2-page spreads, just these really well-observed vistas of just like simple, town, city life. I kind of like them. Of course, most of this was done with slave labor. I like this, how we see a colonial American time traveler say, slaves in a democracy? What an exciting idea. Explain it. Actually, it's Thomas Jefferson. So, of course, they had plenty of slaves because they've been conquering all these lands. That's how you got slaves back then. You'd buy them too, but you could also, every time there was a war, if you won, you enslaved the people you conquered. So we learned a little bit about the slave trade at the time. Even the police in Athens were slaves. They were Scythian archers. Apparently, it was unseemly for free citizens to lay hands on one another. So if you were a citizen, you wouldn't want to be a police officer. It's just beneath you because you're like, oh, I might have to grab someone and cuff them or take them to jail. Kind of so weird how differently people thought at different times. He focuses on this one woman who basically befriends Pericles. Well, more than befriends him. They fall in love, and she bears him a child. And we don't hear anything about his wife, his cousin, and I guess he divorced her. I assume they had divorced then. I thought this was an interesting little factoid. Is the lowest of the prostitutes were streetwalkers, kind of like how it is now, because there's brothels, there's high-class courtesans. The streetwalkers, they would wear sandals where etched into the sole was the message, "Follow me." So if you saw these footprints would follow me. Guys would follow them and and be like, hey, it's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And he dedicates some time to describing what it was like to be a woman at this time. And as you can imagine, not very good. Basically, you have no power. You don't even have economic power. And you're married off when you're young. But this is the time when Greek culture blossomed. So because of all the slave labor and women doing tons of work too, basically they considered a wife basically like a worker. They considered the home, I think the word for home was economic unit, basically. Women would sew and they'd dye clothes. They'd do all this stuff. Even beyond their keeping the house nice and cooking, they'd actually produce stuff, almost like a mini sweatshop. Every husband had a little sweatshop worker. So all the men had all this free time, and that's when, just philosophy became widespread. They could talk about politics and they could write. This is when Socrates was perfecting the art of the tragedy. The guy who wrote Oedipus Rex, and the sculptor Phidias was doing, defining classical Greek statuary. And all of this, what they call the classic style, which he basically describes as, all of these art forms shared balanced proportions, purity of expression, restraint, and ornamentation. The epiphany of this is the Parthenon. And when you think of like classic Greek culture, you picture the Parthenon. I didn't know this. The Parthenon made it all the way to 1687. I mean, we got the ruins today, but it was pretty intact. Even in the Middle Ages, people would be like, oh, I can't believe that building's still there, looking so good. But I guess it was some war, modern warfare, cannons and shit. They blew it up. So now this time of ease and comfort ends, the Peloponnesian War. And this is when Sparta and Athens, all of the tensions between them rise to the surface. Sparta comes to Athens. Athens was fucking around with some of Sparta's allies. So Sparta came to burn down all the fields of Athens. Sparta basically invited all of the country dwellers to come into the city behind the walls for protection. So all of a sudden, the population exploded. Due to this, unfortunately, a plague broke out. All of these people crammed into a small place. And there's a pretty brutal little vista here he draws. Yeah, he really does this a lot. The little 2-page spreads just showing these nice little, this is gruesome, but at least to me, they're pleasing. So now we learn about Socrates. Socrates was a soldier in all these wars going on. He would walk around barefoot. I guess one of the famous stories about him is in camp one day. He just stood motionless, lost in thought for 24 straight hours. Now we also read more about the Peloponnesian War, where it's just, Athens wins a major battle, then Sparta does. It's just neck and neck in every city. It's almost like the First World War, even though it's just Greece. But man, they were just going at it. So Socrates, now he's out in the army, and he kind of begins doubting everything. And Larry Gonick represents his doubt as this little demon angel who whispers in his ear. Because that's pretty much why Socrates is, considered a smart guy. That he wasn't, there's some people who are smart and they just think, I'm totally right. I'm never going to listen to anyone else because everyone's stupider than me. Those people are going to end up dumb because they're never going to learn. So Socrates was always just like, I don't know. I should find out what do you think? Maybe you're smarter than, maybe you could tell me something that is better than something I could have thought of. Look at some of these caricatures, like so stylized and just unlike the Larry Garnick we're used to. So we just see him going around asking everyone about it, anything. Just some random workers like, what of virtue? Tell me about virtue. You know, like just random stuff. So around this time, kind of influenced by Socrates, there were these secret clubs formed that were sympathetic to Sparta and basically wanted to get rid of democracy. It kind of sounds like they were the Proud Boys of their time. They were these youths, but they also would use Socrates. We call it the Socratic method now, a way to debate, where you just ask questions and poke holes in someone's mode of thinking. And they really like doing this against their elders. In fact, one of them, Alcibiades, was the nephew of Pericles, and he would do it to his uncle. We see an example here. This is from Xenophon's Memorabilia. It's pretty fun seeing him just like piss off his uncle and making the uncle all exacerbated, just like, well, I guess if you put it that way. He's kind of exacerbated and befuddled. So I guess Alcibiades he describes him as a cruel beauty with a lisp. Men flung themselves at his feet and he trampled them. Here's some this is like totally like weird Arnold Roth cartooning going on here. And the way you draw Socrates is just so funny. So he was a student of Socrates, and he would go into battle with love with a thunderbolt on his shield. When he decided to go into politics, Athens trembled because they knew this guy was like formidable, an amazing debater, but also he had some radical ideas. I really love this panel here. So 5 years pass. Alcibiades is pretty big in politics at this point. He wants to resume war. He proposes to add Sicily to the Athenian Empire. So there's this huge scandal in Greece. Alcibiades comes under suspicion. Basically, they send him back to Sicily to fight. It was his idea in the first place. But then he realizes, oh shit, man, they want me to come back for a trial? They want me to stand trial for religious crimes and plotting against democracy? So first he takes off to Sparta, gives the Spartans military advice against Athens. You know, he's like a traitor. He seduces the king's wife and then runs away, fled. So now things get bad. Sparta re-entered the war to help out Sicily. The Athens suffered crushing defeats. Thousands of their soldiers were captured by the Spartans, dying in slave labor. Man, some of these characters I really like. I really like this new style. Even though I almost get the sense that he's in a hurry. It's kind of sloppy, some of these panels. But I'm not sure. I think it's just he really wants to do this new style like this. That is some interesting stuff. So Alcibiades comes back to Athens. I guess all is forgiven. And then the Spartans invade. They totally take over Athens. He basically kind of like treated it as a colony. They're like, okay, elect 30 Athenian aristocrats will lead the city now. And, but you guys can just rule yourselves. Even though we're going to leave like 700 Spartans here to back these guys up. And so basically all the Democrats are weeded out and killed. Even people suspected of being Democratic leaders are killed. So finally, they drove so many people out of the city as political enemies that there's enough of them to make an army. So they came back and killed the leader of these aristocrats. His name's Critias. Eventually, everyone made peace. The aristocrats and common people made peace. And Sparta kind of said, you guys can have democracy. And now we learn about the death of Socrates. Socrates had ideas that a lot of people didn't like. They also figured his philosophy led to all these radicals like Alcibiades and people like that. So it's a pretty ludicrous trial. You probably learned about this in school. He has that famous, Plato wrote the famous Apology of Socrates, supposedly reporting on what he said to the jury. I never heard this, though. Apparently, the reason why he gave such a half-assed defense... Oh, here's some of those really interesting characters again, like really fun cartooning going on. I also almost suspect that he was looking at Jules Pfeiffer a lot. There's some Jules Pfeiffer in here. Just a little bit. I see more Arnold Roth. I even see like early Jack Jackson, like God Knows era. So, I'm sorry, getting back to what I was saying. So apparently Socrates did such a piss poor defense for himself because he was old. he was not feeling that good. So he was just like, oh yeah, if I have to drink hemlock, that'll be a nice, quick, painless death. I've got all these ailments. I'm 70. If I have to drink the hemlock, that might be nice. That might be a relief. So now we bid farewell to 5th century Athens in this chapter. Philosophy becomes academic. And so now we introduced to Plato. Basically, after Socrates' prosecution, a lot of the philosophers kind of like laid low or ran out of town. The agora was no longer filled with, philosophers just talking in the streets. So we learned about Plato and, he started writing. Of course, he's famous for all his writings. He starts the first academy out in these like olive groves out in the middle of nowhere. It was open for 900 years, Plato's Academy. Prior to the Dark Ages, I imagine. And then his prize pupil was Aristotle. Aristotle seems like a hothead, even though he's brilliant. He kind of argued with Plato, so when Plato died, he wasn't asked to take over the academy. So he kind of stormed off in a huff. But then he gets revenge in a way. He goes to Macedonia, where he is the tutor of young Alexander, a 13-year-old prince. Alexander really takes to his teachings. Of course, Alexander, by the time he's 20, he's ready to conquer the world. And in just a handful of years, he does. So at this point, so Alexander's father, Philip of Macedonia, he had already conquered Greece, most of Greece. And Athens wasn't a democracy anymore. It was part of the Macedonian Empire. So now Aristotle comes back to Athens. He's all like, hey, you're going to listen to me now. I kind of like this action-packed scene. And so, I guess it was like 3 years, he just marched through the mountains of Central Asia, finally arriving in India, where they first confronted the armored elephants. At this point, his soldiers, even though they admired the shit out of him, they were just like, we got to go home. Enough of this shit. We've conquered like half of the known world. Please, can we go home? And now they stop. But that kind of leads us into the next chapter, India. And we won't be seeing that soon. because I'm just doing the 7 Underground deluxe issues that I have. We have the reading list once again. And as you can see, the Larry Gonick cartoons are still the old style, not the weird new style. Even that elephant is drawn in a different style than, anything Larry Gonick did in the first 6 issues. Interesting. I'm really curious to see the next chapter, even though it won't be for a while. And then the next chapter, volume 8, will be Is Everything Sacred? So I didn't take the books off the shelf, but just to explain, there were 2 more Underground issues of Cartoon History of the Universe, number 8 and number 9. I used to have them, but then they came out with these books that collected about 7 chapters each, 7 volumes of the Cartoon History of the Universe in one big book. It was published by a mainstream publisher, and I have the second and third one of those, which complete the Cartoon History of the Universe. So when I bought that second book, the ones that are chapters 8 through 13, I sold the 2 comics of 8 and 9 because I'm like, they're reprinted in here. I really regret it because I know it's silly, but just for these covers, even though they're usually not that great, but I do have those books, and sometime in the future I will continue looking at Larry Gonick's. I just want to move on to other stuff for now, and they're not. I mean, I guess they're not really underground comics. They're big mainstream published books. If you guys probably know this, those books sold very well. They're perennial sellers. Many generations of kids have learned history from them. And Larry Gonick also went on to make, 10, 20, 30 books in a similar vein, where using his cartooning to explain science, computers, economics, and any subject you could think of for college credit. He's probably done a comic version of, almost like a dumbed down version. It's a lot more palatable to read a comic about economics than read a boring text. So he pretty much made his own little cottage industry for the rest of his life. He even did the Cartoon History of American History, which I'd like to get that one day. But yes, so I will come back to these maybe in a year or so. The way I still have so many comics to look at, and maybe before then, I don't know. I am going to try to stay in a more regular schedule. I've pretty much been making a video a day, and even when I miss a day, I try to make 2 the next day. But I've had all these technological problems. I got a new phone. I still got to catch up, but pretty soon I should be way more regular because I have way more memory on my phone. I can backpile videos for a long time and be all ready to go. But I've got to make those videos now and get that back pile. So enough of that. I'm rambling. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed looking at these cartoon histories of the universe with me. There is more to come, just a ways down the road. And thanks for tuning in. And I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.